I would like to call to order the regular board meeting of Tuesday, November 25th, 2025. As is our custom, we begin our board meetings with the singing of our national anthem. We are very honored today to have a pre-recorded video of students from Douglas Harkness School singing O Canada. I'd like to ask everyone to please stand and follow the lead of the students. The Calgary Board of Education acknowledges the traditional territories and oral practices of the Treaty's 7 nations, including the Siksika-Sitsippi, comprised of the Siksika, the Kainai, the Piikani, and the Anasazi-Piikani nations. We acknowledge the Tsuut'ina and the Yarhe Nakota, comprised of the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney nations, the Métis Nation within Alberta, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. This land on which we gather is traditionally known as Mohkinstsis, Gusitste, Wincheespaw, and Otusquany. As a learning organization, we are committed to advancing the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action focused on education for reconciliation. Oki, Dananasta, Ambawastich, Tanse, Tanashi, bonjour, hello, and welcome to all of our staff and public in attendance at the meeting. Representing our stakeholder groups, I would like to recognize Stephanie Clements from the Alberta Teachers Association, Local 38, Clay Gordon from the Canadian Union of Public Employees, Local 40, Jennifer George from the Elementary School Principals Association, and Matthew Armstrong from the Senior High School Principals Association. Our first item of business is to approve the agenda for today's meeting. Ms. Miner, do you have any changes that need to be noted?
Madam Chair, there are no agenda changes to be noted for today's meeting.
Could I have a motion that the agenda be approved as submitted? Thank you, Trustee May. Those in favor? That is carried unanimously. Next on our agenda is item 8.1, 2024-25 year-end financial results and audited financial statements. Trustee Regal, as chair of the board's Audit and Risk Committee, would you please introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair Hack. The Audit and Risk Committee met on November 19th with administration and our external auditors, KPMG. Because 3 new committee members attended for their first time, Superintendent Grundy delivered, for their benefit, an overview of how the CBE is funded and manages its finances. Superintendent Grundy then presented the 24-25 fourth quarter variance report and the financial results of the year ended August 31st, 2025, including the audited financial statements. KPMG presented their audit findings report. The committee members asked thoughtful and probing questions during both and following each item, including during the portion of the meeting when we met alone with them. After ascertaining that the CBE administration coordinated and cooperated fully with the external auditors, and there were no significant concerns about how funds were received, processed, and dispersed, the committee unanimously recommended that the Board of Trustees approves the financial results report, the audited financial statements, and their submission to the Minister of Education by November 30th, 2025. The Board of Trustees met with the external auditors and administration on November 21st to ask questions for clarification. We had an opportunity to meet alone with auditors just as the committee did. As a result, we are here today to complete the process.
Thank you. Chief Superintendent Pittman, would you also like to speak to the report?
Thank you, Chair Hack and trustees, and thank you, Trustee Regal, for your overview of the process thus far. As noted before you today are the audited financial statements for the CBE for 24-25 school and fiscal year. The information contained in these statements provides a concise 134-page summary of the CBE's actions and activities between September 1st, 2024 and August 31st, 2025. The Education Act, subsection 139(2)(b), requires that these financial statements, related notes, and schedules be presented to the Board of Trustees for review and approval prior to submission to Alberta Education on or before November 30th of each year. This requirement is part of your duty as governors of the CBE to account for the resources entrusted to the organization you govern. In December, you will receive the annual education results report for the same year, while typically provided at the same time as the audited financials. As a result of the opportunity to present it in December, at that time you will have the ability to account for the student outcomes achieved through the actions and activities of the CBE. To assist the board in its deliberations on these financial statements, there are several mechanisms in place to provide assurance to the Board of Trustees that the information contained in the statements is complete, accurate, and presented fairly. First, CB administration employs experts in financial reporting who prepare the financial statements in accordance with the board's direction, the direction of Alberta Education and Childcare, and the requirements of the public sector accounting standards that inform the presentation of financial information for public sector entities such as the CBE. Second, the Board of Trustees retains the services of an independent and objective third-party audit and assurance firm. In the CBE's case, that firm is KPMG LLP. KPMG examines our financial statements on behalf of the Board of Trustees to ensure that they are materially correct and consistent with the accounting standards and direction I noted earlier. At the conclusion of their work, KPMG LLP provides a professional opinion to the Board of Trustees on the financial statements, and you can see that opinion in the information before you today. In the vernacular of the accounting profession, KPMG LLP's opinion on the CBE financial statements, notes, and schedules is without qualification or reservation. Said another way, it is a clean audit opinion. Third, the Board of Trustees has constituted an Audit and Risk Committee, as already referenced, that's charged with reviewing the audited financial statements prior to the presentation to the Board of Trustees. And the Audit and Risk Committee is comprised of two members and the Board of Trustees two members of the Board of Trustees, along with up to 7 knowledgeable experts drawn from the community. Those individuals have expertise in finance, risk management, and financial reporting. And based on its consideration of the audited financial statements, the Audit and Risk Committee provides a recommendation, as shared today, to approve the information provided by CB administration. And fourth, CB administration presents these audited financial statements to you in a public board meeting where you may ask any questions you have to meet your needs as governors. Trustees, for the 24-25 fiscal year, the process I just outlined should provide you with the confidence that you require to approve this report for submission to Alberta Education. I'll now turn to our Chief Financial Officer and Superintendent of Finance and Technology Services to provide some additional context on the material before you.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent Pittman, and through the chair. Trustees, to assist in meeting your needs, I would offer the following points for your consideration. As noted, these financial statements provide a summary of the CBE's actions and activities from a financial perspective that occurred between September 1st, 2024 and August 31st, 2025. The 2024-25 school year was impacted by 3 significant things: high school utilization rates across the system, high schools as opposed to high school, growing student complexity, and uncertainty related to collective bargaining across multiple union groups. As one expects, high school utilization rates and increasing student complexity driven by historic levels of enrollment growth impact all parts of the CBE. It is not surprising then that those impacts are reflected in the financial information before you today. On a year-over-year basis, revenue has increased, largely in step with enrollment growth. Alberta Education and Childcare, in response to significant enrollment growth across the public school systems, enhanced the Supplemental Enrollment Growth Grant. Those additional funds, in addition to being welcomed, are reflected in the information before you today. That said, the CBE's funding per student continued to track at 2018-19 levels throughout the 2024-25 school year. As per student funding remained constrained, 2024-25 saw continued challenges related to inflationary cost pressures and the increasing cost of labor. That means that throughout 2024-25, the CBE had to work hard to maintain the ratio of students to school-based staff and the scope of services and supports for students. Put simply, dollars don't stretch as far as they once did. With the increased revenue, it's not surprising that we also saw an overall increase in expenditures. The increased expenditures reflect the hiring of teachers, educational assistants, and other school-based support staff to address the growing CBE student enrollment. The CBE also needed to augment some centralized resources that ensure the day-to-day functioning of the organization. Overall, the CBE received just over $21 million more than what it spent for the 2024-25 school year. That annual operating surplus was driven by several factors. First, the CBE saw a sizable reduction in overall insurance costs after implementing several risk mitigation strategies across the system. Those mitigations were well regarded by our various insurers and resulted in lower premiums. Similarly, the CBE saw a significant decrease in overall utility costs due, in large part, to our ongoing investment in energy efficiency retrofits. That said, relatively moderate temperatures also assisted. Prudent investment of the CBE's short-term cash holdings saw larger than forecast investment returns. Those investment returns are then available to support teaching and learning in the following school year. During 24-25, the CBE sold Dr. Norman Bethune School. The proceeds of disposition and the related gain on the sale further augmented the CBE's year-end position and capital reserves. We also saw a slight increase in one-time funding from Alberta Education and Childcare related specifically to educational programs in institutions. On the expenditure side, the CBE successfully negotiated several collective agreements in 2024-25. On an annual basis, those agreements increased the CBE's overall costs by $7.9 million. Trustees, while I am speaking about collective agreements, it is important to note that settlement costs for all bargaining groups other than the Alberta Teachers Association are not directly funded by the provincial government and must be found from within the CBE's budgeted resources. Turning to the ATA, we have also incorporated a provision in these financial statements for the Alberta Teachers Association settlement with government. While precise information is not yet available on the amount of the retroactive pay impacting 2024-25, we have made an estimate based on the best information available to us. Both the cost of the retroactive payment and the offsetting grant receivable from Alberta Education and Childcare has been accrued. At just over $21 million, the annual operating surplus is approximately 1.3% of total CBE expenditures. Given all of the events that unfolded through the 2024-25 school year, coming within $21 million of our $1.6 billion in funding is remarkable. Last time at this year, I spoke to you about the fact that the CBE runs close to the line in terms of surplus and deficit. Said another way, the CBE works diligently to maximize the dollars that are directed towards teaching and learning in the classroom and to ensure that the funding received in the year is invested on the students in the system for that same year. As a result, Over time, the CBE's accumulated surplus from operations declined to a modest $1.5 million as at August 31st, 2024. With an operating surplus of $21 million, the CBE's accumulated surplus from operations has grown to $23.6 million as of the end of August 2025. That means that the CBE has improved financial flexibility as it relates to operating reserves. We aren't, however, where we want to be just yet. As previously discussed in this forum, CBE administration is committed to increasing the CBE's accumulated surplus from operations to $35 million by the 2026-27 school year. At $35 million, the CBE's accumulated surplus would be the equivalent of approximately 2% of total expenditures. At 2% of total expenditures, the CBE's ability to meet student needs both now and into the future is reasonably assured. While we have made good progress, more remains to be done. That said, based on our values of students come first, learning is our central purpose, and public education serves the common good, the CBE will continue to maximize dollars for teaching and learning in the classroom while ensuring we increase the CBE's flexibility to respond to important and emerging system needs. Overall, the CBE's finances are sound. While challenges remain, the stewardship demonstrated by staff across our 251 schools and 7 service units gives me confidence that the CBE is ready to meet the needs of students now and into the future. Trustees, as corporate treasurer, I am happy to recommend these financial statements for your approval and submission to Alberta Education and Childcare. We're now happy to take your questions.
Trustees, any questions or comments on the report? Trustee Bolger, go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Superintendent Grundy, for that. So right now, the financial health matrix, Appendix 4 in the report, indicates a neutral status and trend with regard to capital reserves. Our capital reserves are critical to fit up new schools, of which we have 15 opening in the next several years. So given the forthcoming impacts of the Real Property Governance Act, the RPGA, what is the strategy to rebuild the capital reserves to reasonable levels, and what level of risk does the CBE face moving forward?
Through the chair, I would begin by saying the CBE's capital reserves at this exact moment are probably adequate for need. We do have significant numbers, 15 new schools coming our way, plus 1 replacement school, which will draw those down significantly. So that's our reality. The Real Property Governance Act does put a significant wrench in the accumulation of capital reserves going forward, where in the past, when the CBE would sell a property, like Dr. Norman Bethune that I discussed previously, the proceeds of that disposition would go into our capital reserve and be available to fit up new schools, replacement schools, modernizations going forward. Under the Real Property Governance Act, that option will no longer be available to us. We will most likely be required to sell our properties to the provincial government at net book value, which in many cases could be negligible dollars. So the strategy going forward, there really is only one, which is that we have to find those capital reserve dollars from within our overall grant funding on an annual basis to make sure that we have a capital reserve that's adequate for the purposes that we see coming down our track.
Trustee Cordova, go ahead.
Just to follow up on the previous question, are the funding levels sustainable to maintain our classroom sizes at this program, programs, and support services, as well as transportation? And if not, what are the financial performance alignments going to be with the goal of the strategic planning for the board?
Through the chair. That's a big question. So we, as I mentioned, track per student funding. And the reason we track per student funding is it has a solid ability to cut through the noise associated with the innumerable grants that government uses to fund public school jurisdictions in the province. So whether funding is up or down overall. If you look at per student funding, it tells you how much per student you're going to be getting. Generally speaking, if per student funding goes up, that tends to bring overall class sizes down, and if per student funding goes down, overall class sizes tend to go up. That's the simple math of public education. If we are required to transfer a portion of our grant funding into capital reserves going forward, I think it's no surprise, or should be no surprise to anybody, that that will put a squeeze on the remaining budget and our ability to deliver programs and services. So it will have to be a thoughtful decision. We'll have to consider fully the impacts on teaching and learning, which is our primary purpose, and how much and over what period of time we can start to contribute to our capital reserves. I would also say, however, we are in conversations with the provincial government about the impacts of the RPGA, and that conversation is ongoing.
As trustees contemplate some questions, I'll ask a couple here, maybe in separate parts. So MD&A 5, it states a $4.6 million transportation revenue deferral to the 2025-26 school year, which we're currently in. Can you just explain a little bit about what that means for CBE?
Through the chair. So for the transportation block, or the transportation program specifically, there was a change in accounting treatment that occurred in the 24-25 school year. So looking through that and trying to simplify it, we had an approximate $2.6 million deficit in student transportation for the 24-25 school year. That deficit was covered off by approximately $7 million that came into the transportation block as a carry forward from the prior year. However, the change in accounting treatment was that while we were no longer able to treat excess funds in the transportation block as a surplus, we had to treat them as a deferred revenue, and that was at the direction of Alberta Education. So because we had a transfer in and no transfer out, we had to record a $7 million deficit to make that all work, because when we set up the deferral, you take some revenue out to set it up. Long story short, looking through all that, we did have a $2.6 million deficit. It was covered off by the amount carried forward from the prior year, and we have approximately $4.6 million, I think the number is, going forward into 25-26.
Trustee Cordova, go ahead.
My question is regards to Schedule 8, the ROE obligation, or RARO obligation. There we go. Are there any, based on this Schedule 8, are there any ARO expectations that will significantly impact us in the next 5 years?
Through the chair. So the the asset retirement obligation, see, we all do it. The asset retirement obligation is what I would describe as an accounting construct to try and augment the value of facilities that we own, based on the assumption that the value has been depressed by the fact that those buildings may contain, or the buildings contain certain substances and whatnot that are no longer appropriate in buildings. Having said that, everything's safe, everything's secure, everything is in an appropriate state. It's not an amount that we're obligated to pay to resolve. So the CBE's approach is, as government funds us for things like infrastructure maintenance and renewal, capital maintenance and renewal, major modernizations, we undertake work that will remediate some of those asset retirement obligation liabilities. So long story short, no, there's nothing related to the asset retirement obligation that should cause any pressure on the CBE's operating budget going forward.
Trustee Cordova, go ahead.
So on a follow-up on that, then is there anything that will, or event that's occurred that will reduce the liability?
Through the chair. So if we dispose of a building that is included in the bundle of buildings that create our asset retirement obligation, that will have an impact. If we undertake infrastructure maintenance and repair projects or capital maintenance and repair projects on a facility that has some kind of substance in it and we remediate it, that will tend to bring the liability down. And similarly, if we do a major modernization, that generally just about eliminates the ARO associated with that building because we bring it up to code. Having said all that, at the same time, the cost of remediating the ARO will continue to climb due to inflation, labor costs, costs of materials. And I would expect that increase will likely offset any headway we would make in terms of that remediation effort. So it will be a feature of our financial statements going forward for as long as I can imagine.
Trustee Close, go ahead.
Thank you. Moving to the, and you did preface this in your opening remarks about our operating reserves moving towards 2% or 35 million. And we know that Metro School districts must maintain operating reserves between 1% and 6% of prior year total operating expenses, and currently ours is 1.5. So it's within these guidelines. And given that operating reserves, and I think this is mentioned in the financial health matrix, my favorite schedule, that it provides the CBE with short-term flexibility to address unanticipated, unfunded costs, or so emergent situations or funding special initiatives. But what types of emergent situations or special initiatives are we anticipating? And why have we chosen to build our operating reserve to 2%, for example, rather than 1% or remaining at 1.5%?
Through the chair, maybe I'll start the answer with a bit of context. So at 1.6 billion, the CBE spends approximately $4.4 million each and every calendar day. If we divide our 1.6 billion by the approximately 185 school days in a year, we spend approximately $8.6 million per school day. So given those amounts, an operating reserve of 35 million, or approximately 2%, is equivalent to 4 or 5 days of operations, depending on which metric you use. So it's not a insignificant amount in absolute dollars. 35 million is a big number. However, in our context, it's a relatively modest number. What are the kinds of things then that we need to be prepared for? And usually it's not the things that we anticipate, it's the things that we don't anticipate. So some of the things would include sudden and unexpected increases in enrollment, for example. So if the federal government changes its immigration policy and we see an increase in newcomers to Canada, that has an almost immediate impact on the CBE as those people move to Calgary, to Alberta, and come to school. So we need to have some flex to do that kind of thing. Sudden and unexpected changes in the cost of programs. We've all been alive to a world of late where suddenly tariffs is the center of many conversations, and those costs come across to the CBE, and we may see something that was unanticipated in terms of costs. Unexpected needs to change or shift educational programs. Depending upon the student population that we're serving, they have different needs, and if we see a significant enrollment and that enrollment has different components, we may need to adjust in the short term, and we need reserves to do that. Unexpected changes in legislation and regulation. So we've seen that before where government has its plans, but we don't find out until the legislation comes to the fore, and it can sometimes have significant implications that we as a school jurisdiction need to respond to. And finally, I would say things like unexpected global events, pandemics, for example. So there are innumerable things that can come our way that require us to have some level of in-year flexibility to give ourselves time to plan and adapt, and to give government, our primary funder, time to plan and adapt.
Trustee Close, go ahead.
Can I just ask you to go a little bit further and explain to me why 2% versus 1.5? I mean, it's such a minimal amount. I understand the framing here. I understand it would be one-time use. I think, so to color my thinking, when we have a budget that is so close to the line, and and there's unanticipated needs in a public institution that is funded by the provincial government, why do we need to go up to 2% versus 1.5?
Through the chair, a great question. I think we're informed by the provincial government that has set limits of 1% and 6%, as you mentioned. So I think that's one factor. I think another factor is, as I mentioned, how much it costs to run this system each and every day. So while a difference of 0.5% is a small amount in percentage terms, it is millions of dollars in our context. We know that when we run close to the line and assume that everything that we planned for happens as we expect, there can still be modest variations of 0.5% plus or minus. So we can be balanced, and we can end up with a $8 million deficit, 0.5%, but still $8 million. If we get two of those back to back, that's $16 million. So if we run at 1% or 1.5%, we're just that much closer to the line. Another aspect of that is that the way the accounting works, as we carry forward money from one year to the next, there can be impacts on our accumulated surplus from operations, and we need to make sure that we have sufficient resources to accommodate those. In a normal year, it's not an issue. In some years, the carry forward in can exceed the carry forward out, and that has significant negative implications for our accumulated surplus from operations. Is there a perfect number? No. I mean, it depends on what happens, and my crystal ball isn't that clear. So we've settled on 35 million, or approximately 2%, as a happy medium. If we were at 6 times 1.6 is a big number, close to $100 million. I don't think it's palatable to have $100 million sitting aside without any plans for it. At 1%, you're at $16 million, and that's really razor thin.
I'm going to jump back to just kind of a follow-up to Trustee Cordova's question, but I want to specifically talk a little bit more about the CMR and IMR grants. I know it was touched on with the ASO. So MD&A 13, I think I'm looking at the fourth paragraph. If I were to read between the lines, am I correct in assessing that the CBE does not receive enough in CMR and IMR funds to maintain the conditions of buildings as compared to industry standards, which invest about a 1% or 2% per year in major maintenance and renewal projects? And with that understanding, are we triaging the money that we get to our projects?
Through the chair to the chair. So I think that's a true statement that all things being equal, we would prefer to receive more money for infrastructure maintenance and renewal and capital maintenance and renewal. Why would we want to do that? Because it gets us out of the reactive phase, where we're addressing issues and challenges when they occur, and more into a proactive phase where we can actually do scheduled maintenance on the schedule that we expect to make sure that things like boilers, windows, roofs, et cetera, are maintained to the standard we expect. We are trading to an extent on the invested capital initially, and we hope that the boiler lasts a little longer than it's supposed to, which they tend to do, which allows us to operate with lower levels of IMR and CMR funding. Are we triaging? I would say, yeah, we prioritize where we invest our dollars to get the most extra life out of the assets we have, and make sure that students continue to have those supportive learning environments that we all wish. And I don't know if my colleague from Facilities and Environmental Services may want to add a little bit more.
To the chair. Very well spoken from my counterpart. I would just add that the impact of moving to more of a breakdown maintenance approach as opposed to more proactive is twofold. One, it's more expensive when you're having to rapidly secure the resources, a contractor or provider, to be able to repair the system that's failed. And secondly, of course, there's the classroom impact and the fact that when we push our systems to failure, well, certainly at that point in time, we get to a situation where more frequently than we'd like, learning in classrooms can be impacted by the fact that those systems weren't replaced during other times, for example, the summer, when students aren't present.
I'm going to make a comment and then we'll go to Trustee Bolger for a continuation. I know along that page, we have, was it 56.7% of our buildings over 50 years old? So knowing how old our buildings are, that context, and in relation to, we expect buildings to last about 50 years, that is the span of their life, and not receiving the 1% to 2% industry standard is concerning. Trustee Bolger, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Hack. And just on that topic, we know that there are several grant funds that we receive through Alberta Education and Childcare that are targeted or restricted and that cannot be spent elsewhere. So these include transportation, operations and maintenance, IMR, and system administration. But conversely, and correct me if I'm wrong, instructional dollars can be used to offset costs in other areas, notwithstanding CB policy direction like our transportation. So Schedule 3 shows an operations and maintenance deficit of $22,481,000, and Schedule 4 outlines various O&M expenses. So given that the operations and maintenance funding includes heating, lighting, cleaning, the maintenance of schools, which seems like basic necessary expenditures, what do we attribute the $22.5 almost $1 million deficit to? And when the report says these funds come out of the global budget, does this mean that instructional dollars are being redirected from classroom to keep the lights on and the heat turned up?
Through the chair. One thing I really love about my job is the really easy questions I get. But no, thank you. So Schedule 3 is a great place to start. Down in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see that total expenditures for the CBE for the 2024-25 school year were $1.643 billion. And then on that same line, you can see what portion of expenditures are attributed to each of the various blocks of expenditure. You mentioned them: instruction, transportation, O&M, system administration, external, and transportation. Let's turn to O&M first. I would say we need to keep in mind that the government's funding formula is a funding allocation formula, and as they have mentioned to school jurisdictions on innumerable occasions, it is not a spending formula. So the amount that you receive for a grant, in their minds at least, is not designed to be the amount that you spend on that. So the fact that you spend more on operations and maintenance as a school jurisdiction is subject to local decision making. So that would be their view. I would observe that the operation and maintenance grant, the way it's calculated, does not directly or even indirectly link to the cost of providing operations and maintenance. And we know that increasing cost of labor, and for operations and maintenance specifically, the increasing costs of all the things that are required to operate and maintain schools continues to go up. So there's pressure there. As an organization, yes, we take funding from other areas of the organization to cover off the spending deficit in operations and maintenance. Schedule 3 shows that approximately $44.6 million was a surplus in the instruction block. That surplus is approximately 3.5% of the total expenditures in that block. You'll also notice a $7.7 million surplus in system administration. That surplus is 16.5% of those total expenditures. Those are the two primary areas that contribute funds to support operations and maintenance. So strictly speaking, if there's a deficit in operations and maintenance, we are taking funding from the instruction portion of our budget to cover that off, and we're taking funding from our system administration component of the budget to cover that off. Wrap it all up by saying there is no way that the system administration portion of the budget can cover off the entirety of that deficit. As you can see, the system administration budget is approximately $46 million. The surplus or the deficit in operations and maintenance is over $22 million. We would not be a viable organization if we were to make that trade-off.
Trustee Regal, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm looking at MD&A page 4, and I'm seeking greater clarification about how the money for the retroactive salary and benefits for the teachers was calculated and accounted for. You mentioned it was an accrued estimate. If you could clarify what those terms mean, because certainly I am a teacher, not an accountant, so I'm not as familiar with some of those terms. And if you can just clarify, how did you calculate that estimate? At what point would we be receiving the funds to cover the retroactive compensation for 2024-2025?
Through the chair. So when faced with a situation like this, we turn to all available public information around the settlement with the Alberta Teachers Association. We know, because the 24-25 school year has concluded, when we're making this calculation, we know how many teachers at what point on the grid were in our system at that point in time. We can then apply the percentage increase that is referenced in the material to calculate a number. Our number, I believe, was $28.3 million. So we increased our expenditures by $28.3 million, which gives the financial statements the effect of all of those people being paid the higher amount for that period of time, which they ultimately will be. On the other side of it, we set up a receivable, accounts receivable. So we expect government to pay us $28.3 million at some point, hopefully this year, to cover off the cost of those increased salaries for the 24-25 school year. So that's how that mechanism works. It's absolutely possible that the actual amount that we'll pay in retroactive pay will be slightly different than what we've calculated. So we will just reverse the entry that we made with those accruals and put in the actual information, which will be offset by the actual amount of money we get from the provincial government. In terms of timing, at this point in time, I don't have specific information. I would expect it will come in sufficient time to allow us to make those retroactive payments and then continue on into 25-26, making the increased payments to the teaching staff that we have.
Trustee Vukadinovich, go ahead.
In Superintendent Grundy's opening remarks, and it's come up subsequently as well, we heard about how enrollment growth and the fullness of our schools was a significant part of the 2024-25 school year. And on page 24 of the MD&A, I see that the number of schools in overflow should be fewer than 5, ideally 0. Yet we finished the previous school with over 31 schools that weren't able to find space for all of the students in their community. What are some of the impacts that we're seeing from having so many schools with overflows and students on waiting lists, and what would it take to get this number down to 0?
Through the chair, some of the impacts that we have been observing and that our families have been experiencing firsthand, of course, are longer ride times for students to get to their designated school, unpredictability for families not knowing whether they'll be able to get into that school, and then associated with that, of course, is the challenge of finding childcare, given the fact that oftentimes you do need to be securing childcare a long time in advance. We're also potentially seeing a little bit more higher enrollment in our alternative programs and more interest in our alternative programs, because parents are saying, well, if my child can't attend the local community school and they're going to have to take the bus anyway, well, then maybe we can shop around and look at other options. In terms of what would be required for us to move away from that, well, really, it's a matter of getting all of our new school requests on your 3-year school capital plan approved. It's also, though, a combination of that with modular classroom approvals and the 3-year system student accommodation plan. As you know, there are many areas of the city that aren't necessarily in new and developing communities where a new school can be added, but that are suffering from enrollment crunches. And of course, the fuller our system gets, the more our schools are full, the more complicated the solutions to relieving the pressure on those more inner city schools becomes. And so it's a multitude of different levers that have to be pulled. New schools, modular programs, or modular classroom program, and the student accommodation projects.
Trustee Cordova, go ahead.
So this is just for me, for clarity, for future discussion. So just looking for a yes or no question at this time, as I want to dig further into it. But I'm looking at Schedule 7, remediation. I just wanted to know if there is a remediation structure in place for potential major changes. So not asking for a dig right now, but just more of like for me to know if yes, and then I can look forward further in my own for discussion. Yeah, Schedule 7.
Sorry can I just ask clarity on remuneration?
Yes.
So remuneration for trustees would come under our purview. Land, legal, labor,
Right.
wouldn't happen at a public meeting.
Right, I'm not looking at that part. I'm looking at the part in regards to the bottom half. There's a structure in place.
But it wouldn't happen at a public meeting.
Got it, thank you.
Yep, thanks. I got a question on, again, going back to operation and maintenance, trying to understand O&M costs. We expected to spend about 203.9 million, which was a reduction from last year. So we had budgeted for a little bit less. We spent 218.7 million, which gave us that deficit there. But correct me if I'm wrong, on FS 14, we were given 141.7 million from Alberta Education and Childcare, as well as 52.9 million from Alberta Infrastructure. I'm assuming that these numbers were known at the time of budget, so we did expect to overspend in the O&M bucket, as the other sources of revenue fluctuate quite a bit. So we expect to spend an extra, was it 9.3 million? But we had a shortfall deficit of 22.48 million for O&M. I'm just wondering, what, if anything, does this say about going forward for next budget cycle? Are there any learnings that we've taken? I know we looked for a reduction, we ended up spending more. Does this affect going forward?
Through the chair. So I'll start with recall that the operations and maintenance funding we receive from the provincial government is not linked directly or even indirectly to the actual cost of providing operations and maintenance. So I'd start there. Also, I guess I would have to acknowledge that government could choose to change the funding mechanism for operations and maintenance at some point in time, which may help to mitigate the challenge we have. Operations and maintenance is, like teaching in many ways, a very labor-intensive activity. So we are impacted by the cost of labor related to operations and maintenance, those necessary custodians, cleaners, boiler operators, playground inspectors, et cetera, all of those folks do significantly good work for the CBE, but they come with a cost. I talked in my introductory notes about the fact that we have invested in energy efficiency retrofits, all in an effort to try and moderate our utility costs, and we're seeing some benefit there. But we also know that electricity costs and natural gas costs, natural gas is a little bit different at this point in time, but natural gas costs continue to trend upward over time. And we're also subject to the whims of the environment in terms of how hot it is and how cold it is. So those are things we have to take into consideration. We've also done a lot of work with sensors and monitoring to make sure that we have a good sense of the state of our buildings from a remote perspective, so we can intervene early should something be looking a little bit off, which has had the positive benefit of bringing down our insurance costs. However, insurance costs, like the cost of electricity, are subject to what's going on in the broader market. If there's big snowstorms, big hailstorms, fires, floods, et cetera, across the province, we will be subject to those as well. So I know every year at budget time, we stare Danny Breton, our Superintendent of Facilities and Environmental Services, in the eyes and ask him what he can do to help bring those costs down. But at some point in time, you get to a place where you are doing the most you can do with the dollars you have available to keep learning spaces positive and supportive for learning. And I think we're at that place. The other thing I would say is, while the financial statements break the spending down into those various blocks, we look at the total revenue that the CBE receives from the provincial government, and we make the best decisions possible to allocate those resources to operate the system in support of teaching and learning in the classroom. And that includes ensuring we have appropriate learning spaces for all our students.
Appreciate that. I also know that we're sitting at 96% full, whereas at below 85%, we would see a clawback. So fully understand that the money that we get in that bucket doesn't fully cover the actual spend. And we know we're very full, so we're well using the space. We need extra money in that bucket. Understood. Trustee Close, go ahead.
I'd like to move my questions more to trends we're seeing in creating budget assumptions as we move forward. But I do have a specific question around, and a curiosity of whether we're seeing a trend of receiving one-time funding late in the school year. So a separate specific grant that the government allocates. And my curiosity is it even possible to use this one-time funding in an efficient, effective way for students in the current year it is received? But my first piece was really, are we seeing more of that?
Through the chair, I would begin by saying, and if government is listening, we appreciate every dollar you send us whenever you choose to send it to us. Having said that, obviously, if we have advanced notice of the amount of money coming our way, we can do much better planning, both immediately and longer term, than we can if we get a surprise announcement that, hey, X millions of dollars are coming your way for a thing. So advance notice is the best option. Short notice is, while it will accept the money, it is sometimes challenging in a very large system to make sure that we get the dollars where we need them to be in sufficient time for us to actually do things. I don't think it's a surprise here that public education is largely a people business. And so when we receive additional funds from the provincial government, what we generally do is hire more people. And so we have to find the people to hire, bring them into the organization, appropriately train them, deploy them, et cetera, et cetera. So short-term money can be challenging, but we can find good ways to do that. Oftentimes as well, when government provides short notice funding, they do allow you to continue to carry those dollars forward over some period of time with the expectation that you will get them spent on the thing that was intended in due course, which I think the CBE has a stellar track record in achieving. So yeah, short-term money is got some challenges associated with it. Is there more of it? I would say that when we operate in a dynamic world where both the Calgary Board of Education and the provincial government are seeing new and emerging things happening, so rapid enrollment growth, takes a little while for government to get spooled up to address that. So I would point to our supplemental enrollment growth grant. It came in at a certain level. As enrollment growth continued to climb, government made a change for the 25-26 school year where they eliminated the supplemental enrollment growth grant and implemented a 2-year rolling average funding mechanism as opposed to the 3-year, which tended to benefit boards seeing greater levels of enrollment growth. So one-time emergent funding can help paper over those kind of things. In some ways, it's like our operating reserves. If there's something that's happening, we can deploy those to address it. From a government perspective, it's one-time funding, usually after the start of the school year.
Trustee Vukadinovich, go ahead with question.
On page 3 of the MD&A, I read that significant savings were found in utilities as well as insurance that helped offset increases in other areas. Could you tell me more about how the CBE managed to find significant savings in utilities and insurance at a time of great inflation?
Through the chair. On the energy front, the CBE has been investing for many years now in energy efficiency retrofits, which pay dividends in the form of reduced energy usage. That includes LED lighting, more efficient and effective HVAC systems, working on windows, doors to make sure the building's not leaking heat, lots of sensor technology so we can monitor how hot or cold the building is at a certain point in time, and allows us to adjust the energy needs accordingly. So that's largely, and I'm sure my colleague from Facilities and Environmental Services can provide a more eloquent response. On the insurance front, we've been very much more diligent in terms of how we utilize our insurance coverage. Much like people at home might, if there's a modest damage, do you make an insurance claim or do you fix it yourself? If you make an insurance claim, your claims history takes a bit of a hit, and you can expect to see your insurance premiums increase over time, all else being equal. If you fix it yourself, yes, it costs you some dollars, but you're avoiding that increase in your insurance premiums going forward. So we have done a lot of that work, and that work has been well received by our insurers when we go to the market and ask for coverage for property or liability. And then certainly being, I think, more transparent with our insurance community around the things that we're doing internally to give them confidence that we're well managed and we're reducing their risk is another way of addressing those kinds of risks. So with that, I don't know if, looks like we're doing well, so there, thank you.
Trustee Close, go ahead.
Going back to trends, and I'm probably reframing this a little bit because I'm thinking about the budget assumption process that we go through as we prepare for the next year's budget, and I'm just wondering, as we look back over our time, maybe even 3 years, around revenues and expenses, and if they're changing, so within that context, but do we have to make any new assumptions going forward as we prepare for the next school year's budget, or are we going to be making similar assumptions around the cost of inflation, the cost of labor, the underfunding that I will mention? But I'll leave it to you to respond appropriately.
Through the chair, as I mentioned in my introduction, I tend to look at per student funding. Now, per student funding, you have to make some adjustments for collective agreement settlements because they will tend to increase per student funding, but they don't get you any further ahead. So by example, I would say if you have 100 employees and you pay them $100, and then you increase that $100 to 101, and you get funded for 101, you still don't have any more employees, but you have a bigger budget. So putting that aside for a moment, if per student funding after that adjustment remains relatively flat and is only increased for enrollment growth, then we're short the inflationary cost pressures associated with the cost of delivering public education. We're also short the costs associated with any change in the makeup of the student population. So at this table, we've talked at length around the growing complexity across our system and the increasing complexity that many of those students bring to their public education experience. Both of those things in a world where per student funding remains relatively flat become challenging when it gets to budget time. So is there any fundamental shift in that strategy? And I would say, I don't think fundamental. We still need to look at who are our students and what are their needs, and then how do we meet those needs within the dollars available to us. And that gets obviously more difficult if we're not getting inflationary increases, or if all of the costs of those labor increases are not covered off. We have to find those dollars internally. But I'd also suggest to you that back to the question about the Real Property Governance Act, there's another cost pressure that we'll have to consider. How do we ensure that we have adequate capital reserves to meet the needs of our system if we have no ability to augment those reserves from the disposition of unneeded properties? So that will be a shift that we'll have to think about. And then depending on what government does in terms of that funding framework, I believe the Premier made some comment about a new model. Don't know what that looks like, but depending on what that results in, we'll have to consider what does that mean from a revenue and expenditure perspective. All that said, though, we'll do our best to make sure we maximize dollars to teaching and learning in the classroom and fitting within the dollars that we're given to deliver public education.
I'll ask a question, semi-related here. On FS 14, note that instruction dollars, so that's our Schedule 3, for ECS, or Early Child Care Services, and grades 1 to 2 instruction dollars for the CB finished the year with about 44.6 million surplus in the combined areas. How can we ensure that the money, how can we ensure that we spend the money where it's sort of designated? I understand that this is a global budget, without having to use it to cover other costs, though. I know I talked about O&M. So I know that we've said multiple times here and multiple times within the report that we maximize, prioritize, balance, support, direct funds or dollars to the classroom to support teaching and learning. I'm trying to understand that repeated sentiment with how it aligns with the figures that we are presented with an unused amount or a surplus of the 44.6 in this area.
Through the chair. So Schedule 3 gives the reader a sort of summary view of how we have received funding and how we have spent funding. And as I understand your question, it is, while we say that we direct the maximum dollars available to teaching and learning in the classroom, this shows that $44.6 million went elsewhere or was a surplus. And that's accurate to an extent. So as we move through the year, we know that operations and maintenance funding is inadequate for the cost that we're going to incur to deliver that. So we have to make that provision. And as I mentioned previously, instruction is approximately 78% of our total expenditures. So if there is a need for additional resources, that is the biggest pot available to us. I also mentioned that system administration, for example, has a $7.7 million surplus, but it's only a $46 million pot. So it is unrealistic to expect us to cover off a deficit in operation and maintenance without touching other aspects of our budget. Now, transportation is ring-fenced. We can't touch it for any purpose other than student transportation. So the option available to us is teaching and learning in the classroom. Having said all that, of that surplus, approximately $18 million is related to the fact that our projected enrollment for the year was above what our actual enrollment for the year was. So we have to repay the amount that is the number of students times the grant amount, approximately $18 million, to the provincial government. So it shows up on the revenue side here, but there's no offsetting expenditures because those students weren't in the schools, and therefore we didn't hire the teachers to teach them. So some of the $44 million, about $18 million is that. The remainder is, almost all of the remainder is the expectation going in that we have to fund operations and maintenance. No good providing teaching and learning dollars for a classroom if there's no classroom that can be inhabited by teachers and students. Another $3 million of the surplus was related to the unexpected $3 million grant for educational programs and institutions. So you put all that together and you end up with your $44 million surplus, which half of went to operations and maintenance.
Can I just clarify, when we're talking about teaching and learning, we're talking about learning environment of students, and therefore operations has a significant impact. So it's not just, when we say teaching and learning, it's not just teachers in front of students, EAs in classrooms. We're also talking about that whole learning environment.
Through the chair, exactly. And I would argue that there's not a block on this page that doesn't impact in some significant way teaching and learning. We need human resource systems, we need payroll systems, we need accounting systems. Those are unfortunate realities of operating a large organization in a modern world, and those costs are part of supporting students in getting their public education.
Through the chair, if I might make a comment just on that. While I appreciate the positioning of those costs related to a large organization, I would also add that the efficiency within that is significant. So just a point on that, and I really do appreciate the question around how does $44.6 million go unspent in teaching and learning, and I think Superintendent Grundy has done an excellent job of highlighting the $18 million that we had to return back of that, the operations and maintenance, and then the $3 million. So it's a very different conversation when you break it down simply in that we are allocating dollars, all that we can, to the classroom. And I appreciate my colleagues' diligence in addressing those pieces in very specific ways. I would also highlight, though, that within that, and to achieve a $7 million surplus on the system administration is no small feat, given some of the uncertainty that we've faced and very careful planning on that front. So thank you.
Trustee Bolger, go ahead.
Thank you. And somewhat related, Superintendent Grundy, I would assume that there are many costs that a large school board incurs to ensure a smooth running of operations, but they do not necessarily have a direct impact on teaching and learning. So for example, a very tiny board may not require a human resources team, but an organization with 16,000 employees sure does. Can you share any of the hidden or not outwardly apparent costs that the CB faces simply from being a very large school board?
Through the chair. So indeed, it takes a lot to run a modern public school system. While the focus is always on teaching and learning in the classroom, it takes a team to make that happen. In addition to teachers, educational assistants, and other school-based staff, there are centrally deployed staff that support students in the classroom. This includes occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech-language pathologists, psychologists, the list goes on and on. Learning takes place in schools. Those schools require daily cleaning and maintenance. In addition, the major systems that make a school also require maintenance, repair, and replacement. Playgrounds need to be inspected to ensure safety. Facilities need to be monitored for security and infrastructure purposes. Our buildings need to be insured against damage and loss. It takes utilities, water, sewer, garbage, recycling, electricity, and natural gas to operate our classrooms. We are an organization of people, so the CBE needs to have people, systems, and processes to hire, train, support, and importantly, pay those people. A classroom is filled with things to make the space a learning environment. Those things need to be purchased, delivered, set up, maintained, repaired, and replaced over the course of their useful life. Technology is ubiquitous in the modern public school sector. That technology also needs to be procured, purchased, supported, maintained, repaired, and replaced. All that technology also needs to connect to the internet, so the CBE has to invest in the infrastructure necessary to support connectivity. There are ever evolving learning needs that require goods and services. Auto mechanics, commercial kitchens, digital technologies, cosmetology, construction, welding, the list goes on and on. Those goods and services that support those programs have to be purchased, maintained, supported, repaired, and replaced. We also need to plan for the future, so we have staff tasked with monitoring city, provincial, and national trends to assess where and when new schools will be needed. So like any large organization, the CBE runs on data. The data informs decision-making. It takes resources to capture, assess, report, and protect that data. Those lists goes on and on, but I hope you get the gist of what it takes to operate a modern public school system.
I have one last, hopefully, really quick question. I'm just trying to, MD&A 22, transportation fees. Right underneath there, we have Yellow Bus and Calgary Transit. What it doesn't say on there, is that number of students? Is that cost? And then I might have a quick follow-up.
To the chair, so the 25,000 figure is the number of yellow bus riders, and the 27,000 figure is the actual, well, correction, it's the estimated, it's the designated, or those students that would be assigned to Calgary Transit as a means of transportation, because of course we don't know exactly how many of those are actually using Calgary Transit.
You answered my follow-up. Thank you.
Chair Hack, I'm wondering if I might just add one final comment, not related to that question, but to the conversation we had about the instruction block, the surplus, the operations and maintenance deficit, et cetera. And that is, I don't want people to lose sight of the fact that within our instruction block, we hired 133 additional teachers for the 2024-25 school year. We hired 69 additional educational assistants, and we hired 19 custodians to help maintain all of that. So our school-based staff increased by approximately 221, net of all retirements, et cetera, within those dollars. So when we say we direct dollars to teaching and learning, that's the demonstration of that from my perspective. Thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments on the report? Seeing none, is there a trustee who wishes to bring forward a motion regarding this report? Trustee Regal, go ahead.
And I'm sorry, I just lost my page. There we go. I move that the Board of Trustees approves the financial results of the Calgary Board of Education for the year ended August 31st, 2025, including the audited financial statements for the year ended August 31st, 2025, and the independent auditor's report dated November 25th, 2025, for submission to the Minister of Education. And sorry that I didn't have the mic in front of my face for part of that.
That's okay. Is there any, do trustees have any questions about the motion? Don't worry, I get to repeat it. That the Board of Trustees approves the financial results of the Calgary Board of Education for the year ended August 31st, 2025, including the audited financial statements for the year ended August 31st, 2025, and the independent auditor's report dated November 25th, 2025, for submission to the Minister of Education. Trustee Regal, would you please open debate?
Thank you, Chair Hack. I will begin by expressing my gratitude to all of the members of the Audit and Risk Committee for their contributions to this work, particularly to the external members who volunteer to share their expertise and ensure that the board and the public can be confident in how the CBE manages its resources. The report detailing the financial results for the year ending August 31st, 2025 is a comprehensive analysis of every transaction made by the CBE, covering items including salaries and benefits, utilities, cash and cash equivalents, investments, capital assets, and asset retirement obligations. I must acknowledge the diligent and careful work done by the finance team every day and in the preparation for this annual report, for their work ensures our confidence in the fairness and accuracy of the financial statements. Their work underpins the critical work done every day in our 251 school sites by thousands of teachers and support staff with our more than 140,000 students, ensuring that our mission and values remain true.
Trustees for round 1 of debate. Trustee Vukadinovich, go ahead.
I intend to vote in favor of this motion because I agree that these statements accurately and reasonably reflect the activities of the Calgary Board of Education for the 2024-25 fiscal period. And having been a former member of the CBE's Audit and Risk Committee for the past couple of years, I wanted to also echo what we heard earlier and express my gratitude for the external members who sit on our Audit and Risk Committee and who support the trustees in our work in overseeing the CBE's finances. These Calgarians bring extensive experience and expertise in accounting and finance, and I'm quite pleased with the level of scrutiny they bring to reviewing the CBE's finances. I just feel we're incredibly lucky to have a number of sharp individuals on the CBE's Audit and Risk Committee. And they ask really good questions and they do lots of stress testing. And as a past member of this committee, I can assure you that they really take a close look at these audited financial statements. So we're lucky to have knowledgeable Calgarians contributing to our strong public education system in this way. And of course, I'm also grateful, I wanted to echo that I'm grateful for the excellent work and close scrutiny of our external auditors, KPMG, and of course, I'm incredibly grateful to Chief Superintendent Pittman, Superintendent Grundy, and his team, his very small team, for the excellent work here. I've said it before, but I'll say it again. We are lucky at the CBE to have some of the best people in education working for our school board. And it is thanks to our competent, caring, and smart staff members that at the CBE, we always work with what we get. And at the CBE, we prioritize allocating provincial funding to support the success of each student every day.
Trustee Cordova, go ahead.
Thank you. I do echo with the incredible conversations of the answer and question period, the report, the audit report, and the due diligence of the committee. As I see the 2025 financial statements, it seems like it highlights stable revenue growth. It also has a controlled expenses in most categories and continuance in the capital asset management. Also, the statement of operations shows variance in primarily driven by salary, transportation system, services, and amortization, which is fundamental for the operations of a public school board. This statement of financial position also reflects consistent asset levels with moderate increases in liability, from what I'm hearing, as well as the ARO has also significantly increased slightly due to updated estimates and recognition of additional environmental responsibilities on certain sites, which overall shows me that the net financial system seems manageable but sensitive to, obviously, cost of growth. So on those notions, I too agree that I would probably support this, or I will support this going forward.
Trustee May, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm also in favor of this motion. This motion and report is one way that trustees fulfill our fiduciary duty as governors of a publicly accountable organization. This meets our requirements under the Education Act and is one way in which we can monitor our board priorities and provide transparency to our public. It is positive to see where system initiatives have resulted in lowered insurance premiums and utility costs. But as presented, there continues to be resource constraints in all the buckets of funding we receive. This directly impacts how we deliver public education to over 142,000 students while balancing the ever-increasing support needs of our students within an environment of very high school utilization rates. So while I'm in favor of the motion, I think As others have pointed out in their questions, this is an area where we need to be advocating for many areas of wiggle room, I guess, just to support our students.
Trustee Close, go ahead.
Thank you. And in addition to my colleagues' comments, obviously we have a year-end financial results and audited financial statements in front of us that do provide us all with the necessary financial and strategic information we need in an accessible way to understand the key activities that have occurred in the past school year. Not only accurate and detailed and transparent, but fiscally responsible and sound. We have to add the words prudent and well-managed, confidence and assurance. But what comes to me always is the evidence of the advocacy that we need to participate in, because our financial statements actually drive the conversation of the public education system that we all want. And so I can't help but mention our focus on our need for funding for complex students, our focus on funding for the urgent need for learning spaces, and now I'm going to add to the list our need to fulfill the recommendations of the Aggression and Complexity in Schools Action Team. I think we have an opportunity for a compelling vision that supports the whole child, and we need to ensure that cross-ministry dollars, not just education dollars, are linked to student outcomes. And it's that simplest form of systems thinking. If we can all start thinking of the student and putting that student at the center of all of our collective decisions, we will build a strong community, and I look forward to that. So thank you, administration, for your keen and work, and thank you, colleagues, for your amazing questions today. I believe we've showcased how great a school system we have, and showcased the need to move forward in our advocacy for a fully funded public education system to support student success.
Trustee Bolger, go ahead.
Thank you for that, Trustee Close. Nicely said. Well, these reports to me clearly reflect what a large, complex, and strategically well-managed organization the Calgary Board of Education is. And serving on the Audit and Risk Committee this year, certainly appreciate our community volunteers and who are highly qualified with expertise to support us in our role. However, these 2024 financials highlight ongoing concerns related to the board's ability to replenish its capital reserves, the adequacy of operations and maintenance grant funding, and demand for student learning spaces resulting in overflowing schools. But I am in support of the motion.
I'm going to enter here and add that I know it was spoken to right at the very beginning, and we didn't touch on this throughout, but typically we see this report with the AERR, our Annual Education Results Report. I know that I feel right now that this is missing context, but I also know that's not what we're voting on, so I'll leave it at that. I have confidence in the reporting because not only do we have KPMG LLP doing an audit financials, we have Audit and Risk looking at this at every quarterly. Although none of us are accountants, I have confidence that we're able to understand, we're able to verify the validity of with the external members that we have as well as our auditors. Any trustees for round two? Trustee Vukadinovich, go ahead.
So when I look at the graph on page 7 of the Management Discussion and Analysis, or MD&A, I can see that the provincial government has chosen to keep per student funding essentially flat over the past 6 years, even though over the past 6 years, Alberta has experienced incredible inflation enrollment growth. That's because the provincial government allocates funding on a per student basis. So when enrollment goes up, the funding goes up too. But I say that the provincial funding only somewhat keeps up with enrollment growth because I will note that on page 24 of the MD&A in our financial health matrix, we see that the CBE students who enroll after September 30th in each year are not funded by the provincial government in that school year, which is a problem for how we stretch every dollar. But even though provincial funding increases have somewhat kept up with enrollment growth, the graph on page 7 of the MD&A illustrates that the CBE has had 6 years of essentially flat per student funding. And flat per student funding has come nowhere near to covering the costs of inflation and the increasing complexity of our students. When we were having this conversation a year ago, the CBE Board of Trustees was advocating for an immediate $1 billion increase to annual operating funding for public education across Alberta at last year's enrollment levels, which would have worked out to an approximately $180 million increase in operating funding for the CBE for the 2024-25 school year. We have been making what I think is a strong business case for a $1 billion increase for public education across Alberta because the continuing success of Alberta students is directly linked to the continuing prosperity of our province. Unfortunately, as we see here in these audited financial statements, our school board was not successful. And when I look at page FS-6, so page 6 of the financial statements, and when I look at the funding we received from the provincial government and compare the two columns with the actuals for 2024 and 2025, I can see that the bottom line is that the provincial government funding fell well short of what would have been required to have the class sizes we wanted. And this shortfall directly led to more students with complex needs who didn't get a spot in one of our amazing specialized classes or unique setting schools. It led to students who would have benefited from an EA who didn't get the support of an EA. It led to larger class sizes. As Trustee Close noted, I hope we can approach the coming year with confidence because I am seeing a recognition from the provincial government that this needs to be a priority. So I will vote in favor of this motion because I'm confident in how CBE staff are managing our funds, but I am uncomfortable with the funding levels we receive.
Thank you. Trustees for second round. Trustee Regal, do you wish to close?
Yes, please. I had originally anticipated that I was going to say nothing further to add, but I feel compelled to make a few more comments of a more personal nature, not necessarily as chair of the Audit and Risk Committee. Doing that work over the past days, maybe a week or two, I am indeed impressed by the diligent work of our small finance team and the importance of the mitigation strategies that they've employed to direct as many dollars to our overcrowded classrooms as possible. And I was very reassured by the work of the team to do that. And I thank them most sincerely, particularly in light of who I've been through most of my adult life, a teacher of this very system. I must echo my fellow trustees' concerns, though, regarding the chronic and disgraceful underfunding of public education and the way we see it play out in our schools in the Calgary Board of Education. I've heard reference to operations and maintenance and the need to increase our capital reserves so that we can fit up the schools that we know we're getting and the schools that we know we need going into the future. I know about the dollars that we need to support our complex students and our need to increase student spaces. So I am compelled to both commend our team and to exhort our team and everyone else in the city of Calgary to continue to advocate for increased funding for public education because our students deserve nothing less.
With that said, I'll call the question. Those in favor of the motion? That is carried unanimously. Next item of business is to approve some board meeting minutes. This item is before the board for decision today instead of being on the consent agenda, as is our normal process, because Trustee Regal and Cordova did not join the board until October 31st, and I was absent for the October 1st special meeting, and Trustee Close was absent for the October 14th meeting. Pursuant to Section N12 of the board meeting procedures, any trustee who is absent from an entire Board of Trustees meeting is not entitled to vote on the adoption of the minutes arising from the meeting. As a result, Trustee Regal and Cordova will have to abstain from voting on the approval of all the meeting minutes before the board today. I will abstain from voting on the October 1st special meeting minutes, and Trustee Close will abstain from voting on the October 14th meeting minutes. Is there a trustee who wishes to bring forward a motion regarding these minutes? Trustee Bolger.
That the Board of Trustees approves the minutes of the regular meeting held September 23rd, 2025 as submitted.
Do trustees have any questions about the motion? Okay. The motion on the floor is that the Board of Trustees approves the minutes of the regular meeting held September 23rd, 2025 as submitted. I'll call the question. Those in favor of the motion? That is carried, noting Trustee Regal and Cordova have abstained. Are there further motions on the matter? Trustee Bolger.
That the Board of Trustees approves the minutes of the special meeting held October 1st, 2025 as submitted.
Do trustees have any questions about the motion? Okay. The motion on the floor is that the Board of Trustees approves the minutes of the special meeting held October 1st, 2025 as submitted. I'll call the question. Those in favor of the motion? That is carried, noting Trustees Regal, Cordova, and myself have abstained. Are there any additional motions on the matter? Trustee Bolger.
One more. That the Board of Trustees approves the minutes of the regular meeting held October 14th, 2025 as submitted.
Any questions about the motion? The motion on the floor is that the Board of Trustees approves the minutes of the regular meeting held October 14th, 2025 as submitted. Call the question. Those in favor of the motion? That is carried, noting Trustee Regal, Cordova, and Close have abstained. That brings us to the consent agenda of our meeting. There were no items pulled from consent. As such, all items will be deemed to be approved with the agenda. This concludes the public portion of today's agenda. The board has 1 land, 2 labor, 2 legal, and 2 strategic planning matters to deal with in private. Thank all of you for joining us at this meeting. Our next public board meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, December 16th, 2025.